Good afternoon to everybody present here. My name is Sharad. I was probably introduced. and before I start talking about anything today, let me put it out there that how incredible an honor it is for me to be here at Ohio State today. When I was a small kid growing up in the state of Bihar in India, my parents, who homeschooled me for the first 12 years of my life, they would give me anything that came even remotely close to a pocket money only once in a year. That would be like in the month of December, towards the end of a year. And I would get that pocket money to go buy books, because that in December, my city would have something called a book fair. So I was in middle school, and I went to this book fair, and I bought a book called Over 300 Great Lives. So I loved reading about people who were really successful, people who had either created something new or challenged something that was normal. So I bought this book, and I came back home, and I flipped a few pages, and I landed on this page that was about this guy who you know as the Buckeye Bullet. Jesse Owens? Anybody? Heard of him? So I read about Jesse Owens, and I read how in 1935, your Michigan rivalry is still intact? Who's better? All right, you guys have got a 5-year winning streak in football right now? All right, that's great. So I was reading about Jesse Owens, how in 1935 he went to Michigan, and in 45 minutes, he broke 3 world records and tied the 4th one. And that was great. In 1936, he goes and he wins several Olympic gold medals, and people see it as challenging the Aryan supremacy. And that was something that I was reading about. I was a middle school student. I did not know what that meant in terms of history, and when you would really put it on the timeline of human history, what would that count to? But it was great reading about him. And today, when I'm at Ohio State, I cannot help but recall all the feelings that I had when I read about somebody who was that great as Jesse Owens in competing at something. And Jesse Owens would run, right? And today we're going to talk a little bit about running, and in 2 different fields. One is going to be talking about running your own organization, running a company, running your own startup. The second side would be about probably running for office. And that's something interesting too. And we talk about poverty, and we talk about entrepreneurship, and these are all very, very related things. So the reason why I started with Jesse Owens was 2 things. The first one, clearly to just boost your Buckeye pride, nothing else. Just to boost your Buckeye pride. I just wanted to make sure which is the alumni that I can talk, who is this one of the great famous alumni who I can talk about and we can relate, and it was Jesse Owens. But the other reason why I talked about Jesse Owens was this. That in 1936, when Jesse Owens won several Olympic gold medals, the world was a very different place. He could still not go to the White House, shake hands with the president. He did not get any endorsements. Very few people probably know that he ran against dogs and horses, and people bet money on him. And that's how he made money. Today, if you were a professional athlete, or even an amateur athlete, and if you did really well, you would make a lot of money. You would have... In fact, if I just add on to it, it's not just that Jesse Owens won several Olympic medals and did not get to go to the White House. It was not just that Jesse Owens did something spectacular but did not get endorsements. It was also that at the very same school, he did not get an athletic scholarship because of the color of his skin. And today, several decades later, you know how different the culture at Ohio State is. You know that between then and now, we have landed a man on moon. A preacher marched across Selma. A wall came down in the same country where he won those medals. And so much has happened. We have excelled, we have advanced, we have achieved. And then when you still look around, there are a couple of things that have not changed. We still see people who fight so hard each day, who live on less than $2 a day to survive, who are talked about in big boardrooms and very high up places about how do we solve their problems, how do we solve the problem of extreme poverty, how do we send more kids to school, how do we make sure that everybody has the right to health care, and things like that. So many students, it almost seems to me sometimes, given my own personal story, that so many students graduate college thinking about so many others who are not graduating. So everybody's trying to do something sometimes for somebody else. And that is actually important. That's something that keeps the world moving. But the way we talk about poverty and the way we talk about other people is something that we need to fundamentally question and challenge. So if I was to tell you where I am coming from so that we get a better idea of what I'm trying to talk about, is this, that between this time when Jesse Owens won the gold medal and today when I'm standing here, my grandparents moved from being in a British colony, an India that was under the British rule, to an independent India. My parents were born, they struggled and they fought hard and they somehow managed to homeschool me for the first 12 years of my life and then send me to school. I went to school and then to college on full scholarships. I went to a school. I was not as fortunate to go to Ohio State. Actually, I got a full ride from Tufts, so I just went there. I wish I went here. But I went to school and college on a full scholarship. And in the process, I found out, growing up in the most underdeveloped state of India, I found out how most of us in my state grew up witnessing poverty firsthand, witnessing challenges firsthand. All these problems that we try and understand, you know how some people love doing embedded ethnography, where you need to go to a place and find out how people live? I found out that I actually grew up in a state where I didn't have to go far to really look at how people live their lives, how students felt if they did not go to school, why they did not go to school, why parents sometimes thought that sending a child to school is not a good enough investment, it is actually a bad investment. Because if they were out of school, they could actually work outside and they could work as child laborers and somehow help run a family of 9 sometimes. And so I was seeing all of these things, but I understood how privileged I was and how fortunate I was that I was able to land a full scholarship to go to school and then to college. And while I was in school myself, I competed at a lot of platforms because during the entire time when I was being homeschooled, I did not have any friends. So what I would do was I would read newspapers, and every time there was a newspaper story about some kid or the other who won a full scholarship or who competed and won or who got a high rank at an Olympiad, what I would do was I had a small notebook. I would just write down the name of the child, of course, and then the competition that the kid competed in, and the month in which that news story came out, because next year I would be looking for that opportunity, and I would try and compete. It so happened that by the time I was graduating high school, I was working closely with the United Nations Children and Youth Board, because through newspapers I found out that they had one. I was a member of the NASA Kids Club, because just finding out, I found out that NASA especially had a kids club where students could solve science quizzes and puzzles, and they could write in and they could get postcards from astronauts. It was just a lot of fun. It was a completely different world that I was exposed to in the same state where people thought that, okay, this state was famous because there was widespread corruption and the socioeconomic status was very low, or they didn't fare too well on HDI, that is a Human Development Index. And on the contrary, on this other side, by the time I was graduating high school, I traveled to half a dozen countries, represented India at major platforms, competed in quizzes and debates, in creative writing competitions and Model United Nations, and found that at all these platforms, the people who I would meet would come from good schools and good families, and they were very well rehearsed, and they would practice well. And I would go back to my own hometown and my own city, and I would talk to my own friends about all these places that I was going to. And I would talk to them about what did we discuss there, what was the competition like. And sometimes they had very bright ideas. So if I went to a United Nations Children and Youth Conference, and we discussed climate change and how schools can become hubs where you could start fighting climate change, limiting your carbon footprint yourself. And I would ask my friends, and they would tell me, how about we had a push-button tap in school? I know, here you all have it. This is 2007, 2006, India, one of the most underdeveloped states. So they would tell me, how about we have a push-button tap in school? How about we have these rules? And I would wonder most number of times. I was like, you should have been there. Like, you should have actually been at that platform and given these ideas that you have. And this was happening again and again. I would go to different conferences, compete at different competitions, and I would keep hearing the same, like I would come back, recap that entire episode, including how cool it was actually flying for the first time. But overall, I would hear from my friends all the time that they had cool ideas. And it was somewhere around the point when I was in high school when I asked myself this question. Am I competing at all these good competitions, winning all these scholarships, traveling to all these conferences because I'm the smartest kid ever, or there's something else to the story? And thankfully, the answer that I got from within was the answer that has landed me here today, and was the answer that was, I think, the right answer. It was not that I was competing at all platforms and winning sometimes because I was the best kid ever. It was because I was the only kid who knew about those opportunities. And that line was very clear, that the difference between me and somebody else who was not winning at that platform or who was not at that platform was not that that person was not competent enough. It was just that that person was not aware enough. And that led me to the organization. Okay, we don't have it on the screen. I almost thought that there was a picture of me and the organization's name below it. See, how many things we imagine. So what basically happened was that led to the founding of Dexterity Global, the startup that I run today. And this is basically what we set out to do. We realized that one quick example before what we do. The most prestigious science competition in the world today, arguably, is the NASA Space Settlement Contest. How many of you have heard of it? NASA Space Settlement Contest? 5 people maximum. I actually saw 3 hands. Okay. 5 people in this audience know about NASA Space Settlement Contest. If a kid wins NASA Space Settlement Contest, that student is celebrated as the science wizard of the world, seen as the next Edison or Tesla. Gets into MIT or Harvard or any top school that kid wants to apply to. There are 200 million kids in the world today who can apply to the NASA Space Settlement Contest. Can anybody here take a guess? What is the maximum number of participants that NASA gets in a calendar year for NASA Space Settlement? Just take a wild guess. There are 200 million kids who can participate. 1,000? 400? This is the most pessimistic crowd I've ever spoken to. Now, as in 1,000 is right. 952 is the maximum number of entries that NASA has ever received for that competition. Imagine the number of smart, bright, young, talented people that we are missing out on every single day, simply because they do not know that these platforms exist. So that's basically what Dexterity is trying to change today. Dexterity has 4 major platforms. The first one is Dex Connect, where the moment an opportunity goes live for a middle school or a high school student, we connect them to those opportunities in real time, through newspaper partnerships, through classroom integrations, and through digital media and the web. The second thing that we do, however, is because we understand that when in a small Tier 2, Tier 3 city of India, when a kid finds out about United Nations Youth Assembly, and that kid has never written something that is longer than a page, that kid has never spoken at a public speaking platform, how do you get that kid to go and perform at that level? And for that, we designed Dex Challenges that help students build their critical thinking, research, communication, and leadership skills. 4 key skills that we want every single child to grow up with because they are so, so important. And when you look at any challenge that the world faces today, and if you thought that if we had people who had the critical thinking skills, communication skills, leadership skills, and research skills, the world would look so much different, including the United States. And if the third platform that we basically look at is, I founded this when I was in high school, around 2008. By 2012, we had reached out to 250,000 students who were being connected to opportunities and who were building their skill sets through Dex Connect and Dex Challenges. And that was a point in time when we started meeting a lot of students who said, hey, I can code really well. I want to start a company that would design websites for others. Hey, I want to start a tree plantation campaign. I want to start a nonprofit that would work with students who are out of school and give them coaching classes. These were kind of inputs that we were receiving from people throughout. And we wondered that if you were 14 and if you wanted to start your own company, what are the challenges that you face? And especially when it is in the nonprofit sector or in the social impact sector. And my own story flashed in front of my eyes, that I was barely 14 or 15 when I started. And the challenges that we had to face were enormous. We did not want any other person to actually face those challenges. So we set up a school of leadership and entrepreneurship that looks like a high school MBA program, where young kids with ideas come in, they are in residence for over a week, and then they are aided with year-long mentoring. People who we invite to come in and talk to these students include people who are the best in that field. So when we talk about women in leadership, we bring in the administrator of NASA Women to come in and talk to students about women in leadership and women in science and tech. When we talk about technology, we try and get people who are like the general managers of technology companies or CEOs of technology companies to come in and talk to students. And it is once-in-a-lifetime experience for these kids who sit down, undergo a curriculum that trains them in leadership and entrepreneurship, and gives them this opportunity to really build their skill sets. In process, they solve like Harvard Law School negotiations and a lot of other things. It is incredible being there and witnessing these kids actually go ahead and build their leadership skills and entrepreneurial skills, and actually go out and launch projects and startups and organizations that are fighting real problems. And that is basically what I want to talk to you about a little bit. That the students who come to the Dexterity School of Leadership and Entrepreneurship, are not necessarily kids who come from the top 1% schools of the country. They come from some of the most marginalized communities in Asia. There's a community called Musahars in India. They literally, the term Musahar comes from the community of rat eaters. For long enough, that community survived catching rats and surviving on those. And there are kids who are first-generation high school students who come from that kind of a background, and they undergo Dexterity School, and they go and they continue running their own projects, ideas, and those kind of things forward. And the reason why I want to talk to you about that is this. When we talk about social impact and when we talk about international development, a number of times there are two things that we overlook. The first one is that if you really want to solve a problem that a certain community is facing, you cannot continue paratrooping solutions. For so long, what we have tried to do is, we take a problem that is in an alien land somewhere that we do not even know about sometimes, and we try and paratroop solutions. On the contrary, if we tried and worked with kids and worked with youth and worked with people within the community who can become those people who solve those challenges, that is first and the best way to actually do it. What we hope to do with Dexterity is this, that by 2025, 2035, the next generation of leaders will come from the Dexterity network. They'll have critical thinking skills and research skills, communication skills and leadership skills. They'll come from all kinds of backgrounds, and they'll be able to go back and serve their communities with their education and with the leadership and entrepreneurial tools that they would be equipped with. So that's the first part, that you need to empower people within communities if you want to solve a challenge that a certain community faces. The second part is this, that today, 50% of the world population is under the age of 30, but only 2% people are elected legislators anywhere in the world. So this entire talk about millennials and youth coming in and helping make this world a better place to live in is all great. But if you really look at it, people under the age of 30 represent 50% of the world population, and only 2% of them actually run for office of some kind and get elected. And that's the reason why, between that point in time that I was talking about, Jesse Owens proving people wrong, breaking so many mental barriers and so many stigmas that were attached to him being a person of color and everything. And between then and now, in this entire period, when we've come up with new vaccinations and we've come up with new drugs and we've saved so many lives and we have changed so much in the world around us, what we have failed to do, however, is fundamentally start changing the way we see international development. It's not somebody trying to help somebody else. It has to be all of us working together. There's a clear difference when you're trying to empower somebody to make a difference, and when you're trying to actually go the charity route and give someone a few more dollars, or try and inject a solution in a community. I know how well we use the word inject, but there is great impetus today, more than ever, on how we educate our young people, including those who are in our top colleges and those who are out of it, including those who are in top high schools and those who are out of it. Because the only way we can go ahead and fundamentally power the next generation of leaders to change the way the world will move forward will be when we educate our young people right. When we go out and design those social impact solutions, and when we try and solve those problems, we are not going in either as a nonprofit company, like nonprofit organization that will knock on doors and make phone calls every single time, or as a for-profit solution that would try and inject anything anywhere. Let's try and add empathy to all the solutions that we design. Let's make our solutions sustainable. One of the core goals and dreams that we are chasing at Dexterity today is this. We want to create the next Apple or Microsoft of the social impact world. Because if you really think about social impact, most number of organizations that you see out there today, we do not have a gold standard. There are problems, and every single time we see one problem being outlined and the other. We see that there is a business model that we need to come up with. There's a new, cooler way that we need to reach out to people with. We see all different models and we compare it. But what we really need to look at is that just the way for-profit world runs, and I do not mean to talk about the cutthroat aspect of it. I mean to talk about holding yourself to the gold standards that someone who's receiving this product, someone who's benefiting from a particular service, should be so satisfied by that standard of service or product or information that they are receiving that they should not feel that this is charity, and nobody who's designing those solutions should get this feeling that, oh, we're doing something good for somebody. So let's change that idea of trying to help people by just trying to inject solutions, or looking people as the underprivileged people or people who are not that fortunate. Let's try and change that, because when we look at people as people and not as problems, when we look at people as people and not as the underprivileged, we are able to design better solutions and make change happen. So this is basically what request I have to make to you today, that when you go out of here, please try and enter into one office. It can be a public office. It can be your own startup's office. It can also be the cubicles of JP Morgan or a big technology company. But wherever you are, you will have the opportunity to create impact. Do it through your own involvement and engagement with people. Because remember, at the center of everything that we may be happy with or be disdained by, there are people. And that's the reason why we need to stand up and work with people and make good things happen. And that's pretty much what I came to say here today, because I've got a 1-minute warning. But last quick recap, if we can land people on moon, and if we are so concerned about international development, if we are so concerned about people, let's start designing solutions, and let's run for either great organizations that work with people, or let's run for office, because this is the time when young people can come together, design great solutions, and create gold standard nonprofit or gold standard social impact solutions that help shape the world become a better place to live in. Thank you so much, everybody.
Great feedback, yeah. Yeah, right out there.
Are you just upgrading in India right now, or do you have plans to expand? Are you already internationally available to, say, U.S. high school students?
So we are not in the US at this point in time. Most of our platforms are used used by students only in India. But the Dexterity School of Leadership and Entrepreneurship has had students from Nepal and Bangladesh apply and come in. So Dex School is pretty much South Asia at this point in time, and that's basically how we want to go. We want to really, India in itself is 1.2 billion people. My home state alone is 100 million people. So we are not into the game of traction real quick. We want to build good quality products and services, and then move to the next location. So right now, India first, South Asia next, Latin America and West Africa are places where we want to move in the next 1 decade or so. I'm all in, and I believe I've got 8 more decades in me, so we are all for this.
Yeah, last question, right up front.
Is there some type of model that can maybe be implemented here or pretty much anywhere? Or?
That's actually a great question. The model basically that Dexterity follows is that in last 8 years, we've not gone and raised a single penny in donations. What we do is we have a model that says, if you can pay, you pay, else we'll pay for you. So each one of these services and products and platforms that I was talking about, if you really look at it, they do not solve a rich kid problem or a poor kid problem. They solve a problem that every single child faces when they're in high school. And many of you sitting here, even if you went to an American high school, you can probably relate to these problems that students face. So there is significant traction where people pay for using these products, and anybody who cannot, they just sign a waiver. Nobody knows that who has paid and who is not. And it allows us to continue running on our own revenue and have a self-sustained enterprise in place, and every child gets to be a part of this opportunity, and nobody ever knows who has paid and who has not paid. So that model actually has worked really well for us. That is, if you can pay, you pay, else we pay for you. And one quick note there is that there are a lot of times when we meet students who say, I qualify for financial aid, but my mom saved these $2 for me, that if I ever do something in this education space, she would pay my tuition fee for that, or she would pay my exam fee for that. So that's, again, something that we walk in with a very false notion of, okay, people who do not necessarily come from, people who come from underserved communities do not necessarily have the cash to pay for services. Sometimes they save to pay for their kids' education. So those are very inspiring stories. But the model definitely is, if you can pay, you pay, else we pay for you. Thank you, everybody. This was great.